Zexithara slammed her clawed hand on the metal table. The sound echoed through the classroom like a gunshot. Around her, 25 other students from different alien races turned to stare. Some had multiple eyes, others had tentacles instead of arms, but all of them looked surprised by her sudden outburst. "Humans are weak," she declared, her purple skin turning darker with anger. "They run from every fight like scared children. How can anyone call them a military power?" The Galactic Military Academy's main classroom fell silent. Professor Carthul, a massive centaurian with 4 arms and battle scars covering his gray hide, looked up from his datapad. His yellow eyes focused on Zexithara with the intensity of a predator studying prey. "Interesting opinion, Cadet Zexithara," Professor Carthul said slowly. His voice carried the weight of someone who had seen real war. "Please explain your reasoning." Zexithara stood up straighter. As a member of the Kethmori warrior race, she had been trained to fight since she could walk. Her people respected only strength and despised weakness. In her mind, humans represented everything wrong with the galaxy's approach to conflict. "Look at their history, Professor," she said, gesturing with both hands. "Every time someone challenges them, they talk instead of fight. They send diplomats when they should send soldiers. They offer peace treaties when they should demand surrender. My people would never show such cowardice." Several students nodded in agreement. The classroom held cadets from the most warlike species in the galaxy. They came here to learn how to win battles and conquer enemies. Most of them saw humans as a puzzle they could not understand. "Last month, the Heridian Empire attacked 3 human colonies." Zexithara continued. "What did humans do? They rescued the Heridian survivors when their ships started failing. They gave them medical care and sent them home safely. Any real warrior race would have taken revenge. And what would your people have done?" Professor Carthul asked. "We would have destroyed their homeworld," Zexithara replied without hesitation. "We would have made them pay for their attack. That is how you handle enemies. You show them what happens when they cross you." The professor nodded slowly. He had taught at this academy for 30 years. He had seen thousands of young cadets from dozens of species. Most of them came here thinking they understood war. Most of them left knowing they understood nothing at all. "You seem very certain about human weakness," he said. "Tell me, cadet, how many human military records have you studied?" Zexithara hesitated. "I have read the basic files, Professor. Everyone knows humans avoid conflict whenever possible." "Basic files," the professor repeated. "Have you studied their tactical manuals? Their battle strategies? Their military philosophy? Why would I waste time studying cowards?" Zexithara shot back. "My people have a saying, only the weak study weakness." Professor Carthul stood up from his desk. His full height made him tower over every student in the room. Old wounds on his arms and chest told stories of battles fought across the galaxy. He walked slowly towards Zexithara's desk. "Your people have many sayings," he said. "Here is one of mine. Only fools judge what they do not understand." The classroom became even quieter. Students could feel tension building between the professor and the young Kethmori cadet. "I am assigning you a special project, Cadet Zexithara," Professor Carthul announced. "You will research human military history in detail. Not just the basic files everyone reads. The complete records, battle plans, strategic documents, diplomatic communications, everything." Zexithara's skin turned pale purple. Special projects at the academy were usually punishments for students who spoke without thinking. "Professor, I don't think that's necessary," she began. "You will write a full report on human military doctrine," he continued, ignoring her protest. "You will present your findings to this class in 2 weeks. If your research confirms your opinion about human weakness, I will recommend you for advanced tactical training. If you discover you were wrong," he paused and looked directly into her eyes. "If you discover you were wrong, you will write a formal apology to the Human Diplomatic Corps for insulting their military traditions." Zexithara felt her face burn with embarrassment. Writing an apology would shame her in front of her entire family. The Kethmori did not apologize for anything, especially not to species they considered inferior. "That seems fair, Professor," she said through gritted teeth. "I accept your challenge." "Good," Professor Carthul replied. Class dismissed. "Cadet Zexithara, please remain behind." The other students filed out of the classroom, whispering among themselves. Zexithara stayed in her seat, wondering what additional punishment the professor had planned for her. When the last student left, Professor Carthul returned to his desk. He activated a privacy screen that would prevent anyone from overhearing their conversation. "You remind me of myself when I was young," he said quietly. "Proud, aggressive, certain that strength only came from violence." Sexthera looked confused. "Professor, I fought humans once, cadet, during the border wars 40 years ago. My people, the Centaurians, thought humans would be easy prey. We had superior numbers, better weapons, and a warrior culture that had conquered 12 systems." He pulled up a holographic display showing a star map with battle locations marked in red. "The war lasted exactly 18 days, he continued. "Not because we were defeated in glorious battle, but because the humans did something we never expected." "What did they do?" Sexthera asked despite herself. "They won so completely, so quickly, that continuing to fight became impossible. But here is the part that changed my life, cadet. After they won, they helped us rebuild everything we had lost. They gave us medical supplies, food, and technology. They treated our wounded better than we treated our own." Professor Carthul's expression grew distant, as if he was remembering something from long ago. "I spent the next 20 years trying to understand why they did that. Why they showed mercy to an enemy that had attacked them without warning. My research led me to this academy, where I have been teaching for 30 years. He deactivated the holographic display and looked directly at Sexthera. "Your assignment is not a punishment, cadet. It is an opportunity. You have a chance to learn something that took me decades to understand. Something that will make you a better officer and a better warrior." Sexthera felt uncertain for the first time since arriving at the academy. Professor Carthul seemed to be suggesting that there was more to human military doctrine than she realized. "Professor, what exactly am I looking for in these records?" "You are looking for the truth, cadet. The complete truth about how humans approach warfare. I promise you what you find will surprise you." As Sexthera left the classroom, she felt both annoyed and curious. She was certain that researching human military records would only confirm what she already knew. Humans were weak pacifists who avoided real conflict. She had no idea that her research would reveal something far more disturbing than weakness. She was about to discover that humans did not avoid war because they could not fight. They avoided war because they were too good at it. Sexthera sat in the academy library, surrounded by towers of data crystals and holographic displays. She had been researching human military history for 3 days, and everything she found seemed to support her original opinion. Humans chose diplomacy over warfare. They offered peace treaties instead of demanding victory. They seemed to go out of their way to avoid serious conflicts. She pulled up another file on her screen. This one detailed the Proxima incident, where human colonies had been attacked by Zephyrian raiders. Instead of launching a massive retaliation, the humans had simply reinforced their defenses and offered to negotiate with the Zephyrian government. "See?" she muttered to herself. "Weak pacifist, just like I said." But something about the file bothered her. The report mentioned that the Zephyrian raids stopped immediately after the human response. Not gradually, not after months of negotiation, but immediately. She decided to dig deeper into the incident records. What she found made her pause. The Zephyrian raiders had not simply decided to stop attacking. They had received a message from the human colonies. The message was marked as classified, but her research access allowed her to read it. The message was simple and polite. It thanked the Zephyrians for their interest in human territory, but explained that further attacks would be inconvenient. Along with the message, the humans had sent detailed tactical analyses of every Zephyrian ship that had participated in the raids. The analyses were perfect. They listed every weapon, every defensive system, every structural weakness. They showed exactly how each ship could be disabled or destroyed. They even included recommendations for improving Zephyrian ship design. Sexthera stared at the screen. How had the humans gathered such detailed information about enemy ships during active combat? The raids had lasted only a few hours, but the humans had somehow analyzed everything. She decided to look at more recent conflicts. Maybe this was just a lucky intelligence gathering operation. The next file she opened was about the Saldorian War. She had heard of this conflict but knew few details. According to her basic education, it had been a minor dispute that ended quickly through human diplomacy. The real records told a different story. The Saldorian Empire had declared war on humanity after a trade dispute. They had assembled their entire fleet, over 300 warships, and launched a coordinated attack on human space. The Saldorians were known for their advanced military technology and aggressive tactics. They expected an easy victory against what they saw as a peaceful merchant species. The war lasted exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes. Zexathera read the battle reports with growing confusion. The human fleet had not destroyed the Saldorian ships. Instead, they had done something much more disturbing. They had disabled every single enemy vessel without causing a single death. The humans had used precise energy weapons to target life support systems, navigation computers, and communication arrays. They had left the Saldorian crews floating helplessly in space, completely unable to fight but perfectly safe. While the Saldorian fleet drifted powerlessly, the humans had broadcast a message to every ship simultaneously. The message included detailed tactical breakdowns of how each vessel could have been destroyed instead of disabled. The humans explained in friendly and educational tones exactly which weapons would have been most effective against each ship's defenses. They had concluded the message by offering medical assistance, emergency supplies, and safe passage home for all Saldorian personnel. The Saldorian admiral had surrendered immediately. Zexathera read the surrender message 3 times. It was not a normal military surrender. The admiral had not admitted defeat or negotiated terms. Instead, he had simply written, "We did not understand. Please forgive our ignorance. We surrender completely and beg for mercy." She pulled up more files looking for other examples of human military action. What she found made her increasingly uncomfortable. The Mordak rebellion had ended when humans infiltrated the rebel stronghold, disabled all their weapons simultaneously, and left a gift basket of food and medical supplies along with a note saying, "Please reconsider your choices." The Thrakari border. Conflict had concluded after humans intercepted every Thrakari military communication for a week, then sent back corrected versions with grammar and tactical improvements. The Xerian piracy crisis had stopped overnight when humans captured an entire pirate fleet, gave the crews a lecture on interstellar law, and released them with brand new ships that had been upgraded with better safety features. In every case, the pattern was the same. Humans would demonstrate overwhelming superiority, offer generous terms, and then help their former enemies become stronger and safer. Zexathera found herself staring at a tactical manual called Humane Warfare, Minimizing Enemy Casualties, while achieving strategic objectives. The manual had been written by human military strategists and was apparently standard reading for all human officers. She opened the manual and began reading. The first chapter was titled, "Why Killing Your Enemy is Usually Counterproductive." The manual explained that destroying enemy forces was often wasteful and created unnecessary problems. Dead enemies could not learn from their mistakes, could not become future allies, and could not contribute to galactic stability. The document recommended disabling enemy capabilities while preserving enemy lives whenever possible. Chapter 3 discussed something called Demonstration Doctrine. This involves showing enemies exactly how they could be defeated, then offering them the chance to surrender before any actual harm occurred. The manual included detailed psychological studies showing that enemies who understood their hopeless situation were more likely to surrender peacefully. The most disturbing chapter was titled Restraint as a Strategic Weapon. It argued that showing mercy to defeated enemies was actually more effective than traditional conquest. Enemies who were treated well after losing became grateful allies. Other potential enemies became afraid to attack a force that was both powerful, enough to win easily, and kind enough to spare the defeated. Zexathera realized she was reading military philosophy, unlike anything her own people had ever developed. The Kethmori believed in crushing enemies completely, making examples that would discourage future challengers. Humans seemed to believe in crushing enemies so gently that they became friends. She pulled up combat footage from the Saldorian War, hoping to see actual battle tactics in action. What she saw made her question everything she thought she knew about warfare. Human ships moved through space like dancers performing a complex routine. They avoided enemy fire not through heavy shielding or evasive maneuvers, but by predicting exactly where each shot would be fired and simply not being there. They disabled enemy weapons with surgical precision, hitting tiny components from impossible distances while traveling at tremendous speeds. Most unsettling of all, the human ships never fired more shots than absolutely necessary. Each weapon discharge had a specific purpose and achieved exactly the intended result. There was no wasted ammunition, no missed shots, no random destruction. Zexathera watched one human ship disable 12 Saldorian vessels in 90 seconds. Each shot hit a different critical system, leaving the enemies helpless but unharmed. The precision was so perfect it seemed almost supernatural. She began to understand why the Saldorian admiral had surrendered so quickly. Fighting humans was not like fighting a normal enemy. It was like fighting an opponent who could see the future and chose to be merciful. As she closed the files and prepared to leave the library, Zexathera felt deeply unsettled. Her research was supposed to prove that humans were weak pacifists. Instead, she was discovering that humans might be the most advanced military force in the galaxy. The disturbing part was not their technology or tactics. The disturbing part was their restraint. They could apparently end any conflict quickly and decisively, but they chose not to. They preferred to win without truly hurting anyone. Zexathera had always believed that strength meant the willingness to destroy your enemies. Now she was beginning to suspect that real strength might mean the ability to spare them. Zexathera had not slept well in 2 days. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images from the combat footage she had been studying. Human ships moving with impossible precision, disabling enemies without destroying them, turning warfare into something that looked more like surgery than battle. She decided to expand her research beyond recent conflicts. If humans were truly as militarily advanced as her findings suggested, there should be evidence of this pattern throughout their history. She accessed the deep archives, searching for the oldest available records of human military encounters. What she found was a database stretching back nearly 200 years, covering humanity's first contact with other galactic species. The earliest entry was labeled First Contact Incident, Viridian Empire. Zexathera opened the file with curiosity. This would show humans at their most primitive, before they had time to develop advanced technology or doctrine. According to the records, the Viridian Empire had discovered humanity when human ships were still using basic fusion drives and primitive weapon systems. The Viridians, confident in their technological superiority, had demanded that humans surrender their territory and become a client species. Humanity's response had been polite but firm. They would prefer to remain independent. The Viridians had attacked with a fleet of 50 warships, expecting to overwhelm the backward human colonies easily. The battle had lasted less than an hour. Human ships, despite using apparently inferior technology, had systematically disabled the entire Viridian fleet. The record showed that humans had somehow predicted every Viridian tactical move, countered every strategy, and neutralized every weapon system. After the battle, humans had offered medical aid to Viridian crews, repaired their damaged ships, and sent them home with detailed explanations of how the battle could have been avoided through better communication. The Viridian Emperor had immediately signed a non-aggression pact with humanity, and had spent the next 50 years trying to understand how his advanced fleet had been defeated so easily by primitive human technology. Zexathera read the technical analysis attached to the report. Human ships had not been primitive at all. Their weapon systems had been disguised to look simple, while actually being far more advanced than anything the Viridians possessed. Their tactics had been so sophisticated that Viridian commanders could not understand what had happened until humans explained it to them afterward. She pulled up another early record, this one from the Corvex hegemony. The Corvex were a proud warrior species that had built their empire through conquest and intimidation. When they encountered humans, they had immediately challenged them to ritual combat to establish dominance. Humans had accepted the challenge, but had requested permission to choose the format of the combat. The Corvex had agreed, expecting some form of traditional battle. Instead, humans had proposed a war game simulation. They would engage in mock combat using computer models of both fleets with outcomes determined by realistic tactical calculations. The winner would be determined by which side achieved their objectives with minimal casualties. The Corvex had laughed at this suggestion. They wanted real combat, not computer games. But humans had insisted that the simulation would be more fair and educational for both sides. Reluctantly, the Corvex had agreed to try the simulation first, planning to demand real combat afterward. The simulation had lasted 47 minutes. The human fleet had achieved complete victory while suffering 0 casualties and inflicting minimal damage on Korvax forces. More disturbing, the humans had accomplished this using only basic tactical maneuvers that any competent officer could understand. The Korvax admiral had stared at the simulation results in shock. The humans had not used advanced technology or secret weapons. They had simply made better decisions at every stage of the engagement. Humans had then offered to run the simulation again, this time providing tactical advice to the Korvax in real time. The second simulation had been much closer, with both sides performing well and casualties remaining minimal. The Korvax had never requested actual combat. Instead, they had asked humans to help train their officers in advanced tactical thinking. Zexathara found herself reading conflict after conflict with the same basic pattern. A species would challenge humanity, expecting easy victory over what appeared to be a peaceful merchant race. Humans would demonstrate overwhelming superiority while causing minimal harm. The former enemies would become allies, often better allies than they had been enemies. She discovered records of the Zenthari conquest fleet, 300 ships commanded by the most feared military leader in their history. The fleet had approached human space with the intention of enslaving the entire human population. Humans had met the fleet at the edge of their territory with exactly 12 ships. The human commander had broadcast a message to the Zenthari fleet explaining that they would prefer to avoid conflict, but would defend themselves if necessary. They had offered to demonstrate their defensive capabilities using unmanned targets. The Zenthari admiral had rejected this offer and ordered an immediate attack. What followed could barely be called a battle. The 12 human ships had moved through the Zenthari fleet like predators hunting prey. They had disabled every single enemy vessel without destroying any of them. Weapon systems, engines, and communications had been targeted, with such precision that Zenthari crews could only watch helplessly as their mighty fleet was rendered powerless. The entire engagement had lasted 23 minutes. After the battle, humans had provided emergency life support to every disabled ship, offered medical treatment to injured Zenthari personnel, and begun immediate repairs on the most damaged vessels. The Zenthari admiral had asked to speak with the human commander privately. The conversation had been recorded and was available in the archives. How? The admiral had asked simply. We have been studying warfare for a very long time, the human commander had replied. We have learned that the best victory is the one where everyone survives to learn from their mistakes. Your 12 ships defeated our 300. Our weapons could not even target you properly. Are we children playing with toys compared to your military? Your weapons and ships are excellent, the human had said. Your tactics and strategy need improvement. We would be happy to help you develop better approaches to conflict resolution. The Zenthari admiral had asked why humans would help a people who had just tried to enslave them. Because strong allies are more valuable than defeated enemies, the human had answered. If we help you become better, the galaxy becomes safer for everyone. Zexathara pulled up more recent records to see if this pattern continued. She found the Thrakari hegemony incident from just 5 years ago. The Thrakari were one of the most aggressive warrior cultures in the known galaxy. They had built their society around the idea that strength was the only virtue that mattered. When they encountered humans, they had declared them a soft prey species and had announced their intention to conquer human territory as a training exercise for their young warriors. Humanity's response had been typically polite. They had requested that the Thrakari reconsider their decision and had offered to settle the dispute through negotiation. The Thrakari had interpreted this as cowardice and had accelerated their attack plans. What happened next was recorded in unprecedented detail because the Thrakari had wanted to document their glorious conquest for future generations. Human forces had infiltrated the Thrakari homeworld completely undetected. They had bypassed every security system, avoided every patrol, and penetrated the most heavily defended locations on the planet. They had done all of this while the entire Thrakari military was mobilizing for their planned attack on human space. The humans had not attacked any targets or stolen any information. Instead, they had left gifts. Every Thrakari military leader had awakened to find a detailed analysis of their base's security weaknesses, placed neatly on their bedside table. The analyses were thorough, helpful, and included suggestions for improvement. They were also impossible to explain. The supreme war leader of the Thrakari had found a particularly detailed report that included architectural plans for his personal chambers, complete security camera footage of his daily routine, and a friendly note suggesting that he might want to vary his breakfast schedule to be less predictable. The message was clear. Humans could have killed every Thrakari leader in their sleep, but had chosen to leave helpful advice instead. The planned attack on human space had been cancelled immediately. Zexathara sat back in her chair, feeling overwhelmed by what she had discovered. Every conflict in human military history followed the same pattern. Enemies would challenge humanity expecting easy victory. Humans would demonstrate overwhelming superiority. Former enemies would become grateful allies. But the most disturbing part was not the pattern itself. The most disturbing part was the implications. If humans could defeat any enemy this easily, why did they allow conflicts to happen at all? They could presumably prevent wars entirely by demonstrating their capabilities before anyone attacked them. She pulled up a file labeled Human, Military Philosophy, Classified Assessment. Her research access should not have allowed her to read this document, but somehow it appeared on her screen anyway. The file contained psychological evaluations of human military leaders conducted by other Zexathara had been in the library for 8 hours straight. Her purple skin had turned pale gray from exhaustion, but she could not stop reading. Each new document revealed another layer of the truth she was uncovering. Humans were not the weak pacifists she had thought them to be. They were something far more unsettling. She decided to search for the most classified documents available through her research access. Perhaps the deepest military secrets would finally explain why humans behave so strangely. A file appeared on her screen that should not have existed in a student database. It was marked with the highest classification levels from multiple galactic governments. The title read, Psychological Assessment of Human Military Leadership, Confidential Evaluation for Galactic Security Council. Zexathara hesitated before opening it. Reading this document might get her expelled from the academy or worse. But she had to know the truth. The file opened to reveal a collaborative study conducted by the best military psychologists from 12 different species. They had been tasked with understanding why human military doctrine was so different from every other known civilization. The introduction explained that human behavior in warfare was considered a potential threat to galactic stability, not because humans were aggressive, but because their restraint was unpredictable. Other species needed to understand human psychology to avoid accidentally triggering a response they could not handle. The first section was titled, Competency Guilt Syndrome in Human Military Personnel. According to the report, every human military officer above a certain rank suffered from a psychological condition unknown in other species. They became depressed and anxious when they realized how easily they could defeat potential enemies. The study included interviews with human commanders who had participated in various conflicts. Their responses were disturbing. Admiral Sarah Chen, who had commanded human forces during the Seldorian War, had been asked about her emotional state during the battle. The worst part was not the fighting, she had said. The worst part was knowing that we could have destroyed their entire fleet in minutes if we had wanted to. When I looked at those Seldorian ships, I did not see enemies. I saw people who had no idea how outmatched they were. It felt like watching children play with dangerous toys. General Marcus Webb, who had led human ground forces during the Corvex pacification, had described similar feelings. We spent more time planning how to avoid casualties than we spent planning the actual battle, he had explained. My staff kept coming up with more efficient ways to end the conflict, and I kept rejecting them because they might hurt someone. By the time we actually engaged the enemy, we had developed 17 different battle plans, each one designed to minimize harm to people who were trying to kill us. The most revealing interview was with Fleet Admiral Liu Zhang, the strategic planner responsible for overall human military doctrine. People think we are pacifists, Admiral Liu had said. They think we avoid war because we are afraid of fighting. The truth is much worse. We avoid war because we are afraid of winning. The interviewer had asked him to explain this statement. When you are powerful enough to end any conflict in minutes, every battle becomes a choice about how many people you are willing to let die, the Admiral had continued. We could destroy entire civilizations before they even realized they were under attack. Instead, We spend enormous resources developing ways to defeat enemies without hurting them. Do you know how much more difficult it is to disable a ship than to destroy it? How much more complex it is to occupy a planet without harming the population? The psychological evaluation had concluded that humans suffered from what researchers called apex predator syndrome. They were so far above other species in military capability that they had developed emotional responses, similar to adults playing games with small children. The report included brain scans showing that human military commanders experienced genuine distress when planning battles. The areas of their brains associated with protecting the helpless became active when they thought about fighting other species. Zexithara found a section titled Historical Analysis of Human Restraint Patterns. This part of the document examined why humans had developed such unusual military psychology. According to the researchers, humans had originally been much more aggressive. Early in their spacefaring history, they had fought wars using conventional military doctrine. They had sought total victory and had not been particularly concerned about enemy casualties. But as human technology advanced, their wars became shorter and more one-sided. Eventually, human conflicts ended so quickly that they stopped feeling like real wars. Enemies would surrender as soon as they realized how outmatched they were. The psychological turning point had come during something called the Epsilon Campaign. Human forces had been attacked by a coalition of 5 different species who had united specifically to challenge human expansion. The war had lasted 6 days. By the end, the coalition forces had been so completely defeated that their survivors spent years in therapy trying to understand what had happened to them. Human military leaders had been disturbed by how easy the victory had been. They had defeated 5 civilizations simultaneously while barely paying attention. Post-battle analysis had shown that humans could have won the same war in 6 hours instead of 6 days if they had been trying harder. After the Epsilon Campaign, human military doctrine had changed completely. Instead of seeking quick victories, they began developing ways to make conflicts fair. They started giving enemies advantages, providing tactical advice, and deliberately limiting their own capabilities to create more balanced engagements. The goal was not to lose battles, but to win them in ways that allowed enemies to maintain their dignity and learn from the experience. Zexithara read about something called sympathy protocol, a standard part of human military planning. Before engaging any enemy, human commanders were required to spend time studying their opponent's culture, history, and motivations. The purpose was to help humans understand why their enemies were fighting and to develop appropriate responses that addressed underlying causes rather than just military threats. She found training materials used by human military academies. One document was titled Understanding Your Enemy's Perspective, Why They Think They Can Win. The manual explained that most species who challenged humanity did so because they genuinely believed they had a chance of victory. They saw human peaceful behavior and interpreted it as weakness. They convinced themselves that humans were soft, targets who could be easily conquered. Human officers were taught to recognize this pattern and respond with appropriate levels of demonstration rather than full military force. The goal was to educate enemies about their mistake without destroying them for making it. Another manual was called Proportional Response Theory, matching your reaction to your enemy's understanding. This document explained how to calibrate military responses based on enemy psychology. Species that respected only strength needed to see overwhelming force. Species that valued honor needed to be defeated in ways that preserved their dignity. Species that prized intelligence needed to understand exactly how they had been outmaneuvered. The manual included detailed psychological profiles of dozens of different alien species, with specific recommendations for how to defeat each one without causing unnecessary trauma or resentment. Zexithara realized she was reading the most sophisticated military psychology documents ever created. Humans had not just developed superior weapons and tactics. They had developed superior understanding of their enemies' minds. The final section of the classified report was titled Threat Assessment: What Happens if Human Restraint Fails? This part of the document was marked with additional security warnings. The researchers had attempted to model what would happen if humans abandoned their current doctrine and returned to conventional military thinking. The conclusions were terrifying. According to their calculations, unrestrained human forces could conquer the entire known galaxy in approximately 18 months. They could do this while suffering minimal casualties and without using any weapons or technologies that other species had not already encountered. The report estimated that human victory would be so complete and so rapid that most civilizations would surrender before experiencing actual combat. The few species that chose to resist would be eliminated quickly and efficiently. But the most disturbing part of the threat assessment was not the speed of potential human conquest. It was the psychological profile of humans who might conduct such a campaign. The researchers concluded that humans who abandoned their restraint doctrine would quickly develop severe psychological problems. They would become depressed, isolated, and potentially unstable due to the lack of meaningful challenges in their environment. A galaxy conquered by unrestrained humans would be a galaxy ruled by emotionally damaged beings who had no one left to relate to as equals. The report concluded with a recommendation that all galactic governments should avoid any actions that might cause humans to abandon their current military philosophy. The threat was not human aggression, but human despair at being alone at the top of the galactic food chain. As Zexthara finished, Zexathara stood in front of the classroom, her hands shaking as she held her presentation notes. 2 weeks of research had completely changed her understanding of humans, warfare, and her own place in the galaxy. The confident young warrior who had declared humans weak was gone, replaced by someone who had seen too much truth. Professor Carthul sat in the back of the classroom, his forearms crossed and his expression unreadable. The other students watched Zexathara with curiosity, expecting her to confirm what everyone already believed about human military weakness. "Fellow cadets," she began, her voice barely steady, "I was assigned to research human military doctrine to prove my claim that humans are weak pacifists who avoid conflict out of cowardice." Several students nodded, expecting vindication of their shared beliefs. "I was wrong," Zexathara continued. "I was not just wrong about details or tactics. I was wrong about everything." The classroom fell silent. Students exchanged confused glances. "Humans do not avoid war because they cannot fight," she said, her voice growing stronger. "They avoid war because they are too good at it." A Korvek student raised his clawed hand. "What do you mean, too good at it? How can someone be too good at war?" Zexthara activated the holographic display and pulled up combat footage from the Seldorian conflict. The class watched as 12 human ships systematically disabled 300 enemy vessels in less than 7 hours. "This is not a fair fight," she explained. "This is a demonstration. The humans could have destroyed every Seldorian ship in minutes, but they chose to disable them instead. Every shot was precisely calculated to render enemies helpless without killing anyone." The footage showed human ships moving through enemy formations like dancers performing a rehearsed routine. They avoided incoming fire not through heavy armor or desperate evasion, but by predicting exactly where each shot would be fired and simply not being there. "How is this possible?" asked a Viridian cadet, her 3 eyes focused intently on the display. "According to my research, humans have been studying warfare longer and more intensively than any other known species," Zexathara replied. "But they have not been studying how to kill enemies efficiently. They have been studying how to defeat enemies without destroying them." She pulled up technical documents showing human weapon systems. "These energy cannons can be calibrated to disable specific ship components while leaving life support intact. These targeting computers can track thousands of enemy vessels simultaneously while calculating non-lethal solutions for each one. This technology exists because humans wanted it to exist," a Zenthari student spoke up. "But why would anyone want to make war more difficult for themselves? The point of superior weapons is to crush your enemies quickly." Zexathara felt her skin darken as she prepared to explain the most disturbing part of her research. "Because humans suffer from what psychologists call competency guilt. They become emotionally distressed when they realize how easily they could kill their enemies." She displayed excerpts from the classified psychological evaluations. "Human military commanders require therapy not because war traumatizes them, but because winning is too easy. They have nightmares about battles where they showed restraint, imagining how many people they could have killed instead." The classroom buzzed with whispered conversations as students tried to process this information. I found records going back 200 years. Zexathara continued. Every species that has ever challenged humanity has followed the same pattern. They see human peaceful behavior and interpret it as weakness. They attack expecting easy victory. Humans respond with overwhelming demonstrations of force that end conflicts immediately while causing minimal casualties. She pulled up data from dozens of historical conflicts. The Viridian Empire, the Corvex hegemony, the Zenthari conquest fleet, the Thrakari warriors, the Mordak rebellion. Every single challenger was defeated so quickly and so completely that they became grateful allies rather than bitter enemies. A brave student raised her hand. What happens to species that keep fighting instead of surrendering? Zexathara hesitated before answering. According to the classified threat assessments I found, that has never happened. Once enemies understand what they are facing, they always choose to surrender rather than be destroyed. Professor Carthul stood up from his seat in the back of the room. Cadet Zexathara, please share your conclusions about human military capabilities with the class. Zexathara took a deep breath. Based on my research, I believe that humans could conquer the entire known galaxy in approximately 18 months if they chose to abandon their current restraint doctrine. They possess the technology, tactics, and strategic understanding to defeat any combination of species that might oppose them. The silence in the classroom was absolute. Furthermore, she continued, they choose not to do this because they are afraid of being alone. A galaxy ruled by unrestrained humans would be a galaxy where humans had no one left to relate to as equals. They maintain their restraint doctrine not to protect other species from themselves, but to protect themselves from becoming the kind of beings they do not want to be. Professor Carthul nodded slowly. And what does this mean for our understanding of military strategy, Cadet? Zexathara looked around the room at her fellow students, seeing their confusion and growing fear. It means that everything we have been taught about warfare is based on a fundamental misunderstanding. We study human tactics and try to learn from their successes, but we ignore the most important lesson. Which is, the professor prompted, the greatest military victory is not defeating your enemies, Zexathara said quietly. The greatest military victory is convincing your enemies that they do not want to fight you at all. She pulled up footage of human diplomatic meetings, showing the same officers who commanded devastating military forces sitting patiently through hours of negotiations with species that could never threaten them militarily. Humans do not win wars, she explained. They prevent wars by being so clearly superior that rational enemies choose not to fight. The few enemies who are not rational are educated quickly and efficiently, then help to become rational. A Thrakari student, whose species had experienced human education firsthand, spoke with obvious discomfort. Are you saying that humans are not really a peaceful species? That their diplomacy is just another weapon? Zexathara considered the question carefully. I think humans are genuinely peaceful, but not in the way we understand peace. They do not avoid conflict because they fear violence. They avoid conflict because they have transcended the need for violence. She displayed psychological profiles of human military leaders. These are people who could end any war in hours, but choose to spend months in negotiations instead. They are people who could destroy civilizations before breakfast, but choose to help former enemies rebuild their societies. This is not the behavior of a species that fears conflict. This is the behavior of a species that has evolved beyond the need for conflict. Professor Carthul walked to the front of the classroom. Class, what Cadet Zexathara has discovered through her research is the most important lesson you will learn at this academy. Military strength is not measured by your ability to destroy enemies. It is measured by your ability to avoid having enemies at all. He activated another display showing galactic political maps. Observe how human territory has expanded over the past century, not through conquest but through voluntary association. Species that were once hostile to humanity now compete for the privilege of becoming human allies. Former enemies become the most loyal human partners. A student asked, Professor, why do they do this? Why do defeated enemies become human allies? Zexathara answered before the professor could respond. Because humans treat their defeated enemies better than most species treat their own citizens. After the Seldorian War, humans helped rebuild every damaged Seldorian ship and upgraded them with better technology. After the Thrakari incident, humans provided advanced security training to help the Thrakari protect themselves more effectively. She paused. realizing the full implications of what she was saying. Humans do not conquer enemies, she continued. They adopt them. Every species that challenges humanity becomes part of an extended human family. Former enemies receive protection, technology, medical care, and education. They become safer and more prosperous as human allies than they ever were as independent powers. The classroom fell silent. Again, as students processed this revelation, Professor Carthul looked directly at Zexthara. Cadet, based on your research, how should other species interact with humanity? Zexthara felt a chill run through her body as she realized the answer. Very carefully, Professor. We should remember that humans have chosen to be merciful, but that mercy is not weakness. It is the conscious decision of beings who could choose otherwise. She looked around the room at her fellow students, seeing her own fear reflected in their faces. We are not warriors training to fight human forces, she concluded. We are students trying to understand the most powerful military doctrine ever developed. The question is not how to defeat humanity. The question is how to avoid giving them a reason to stop being gentle with the rest of us. Professor Carthul smiled grimly. Now you understand, Cadet Zexthara. Welcome to the real academy.